Diagnostics and Statistics Manual of Mental Disorders, or commonly referred to as the DSM, currently in its 5th edition, DSM-5. A definition of mental or psychiatric disorder is given and states that while there is no fit definition to encapsulate the entire scope of mental disability, it is therefore a mental disorder that is a series of psychological and or behavioral patterns that reflect an underlying psychobiological dysfunction. This very broad definition encompasses a wide range of mental conditions such as developmental disorders like autism, acquired brain injuries like strokes, and psychological disorders such as schizophrenia and bipolar. According to the Black Dog Institute, 45% of Australians will experience a mental health issue at some point in their life, and 20% currently have one this year. 45% of the Australians who are experiencing a mental disability, in fact, are not being treated in any way, shape or form. This erupts many concerns for individuals susceptible to mental health issues and their risk of poverty, ultimately influencing our reasons for choosing this at-risk group. Our rationale for choosing people living with a mental disability was due to the fact that us as a group see people with a mental illness as misrepresented and disadvantaged by government policies and societal standards. We selected this population group over a physically disabled demographic as it is led to believe that people with mental disabilities are not glorified in the same fashion people with physical disabilities are, as well as individuals with mental disabilities possibly experiencing more alienation and social exclusion due to social stigma, such as the neoliberal argument of deserving and undeserving individuals in relation to benefits. With an alarming statistic that only 4% of all people with a mental illness are able to afford all basic necessities, including food, housing, clothes, and especially medication, which can cost up to $200 a month. Some individuals are not covered in the Pharmaceuticals Benefit Scheme, commonly called PBS. With poverty being described as a state of inferiority or inadequacy, there's an obvious certain correlation linking people with mental illnesses to excessively high levels of poverty.
About 4 million Australians, or 20% of the population, report as having a disability resulting from a health condition. There are 2.99 million people, or 13.3% of the population, living in poverty. Both disability and poverty have been the subject of extensive research, although relatively few Australian studies have examined the relationship between them. Qualitative research tells us that people of working age with a disability still face barriers to transport, employment, education and support, limiting their opportunity to contribute as productive members of society. Saunders' 2007 research paper used the quantitative data collected from the 1998-99 Household Expenditure Survey to estimate the costs of disability using a standard of living approach, and further use those estimates to compare poverty rates among those with and without disability. The results strongly suggest that where there is an adult in the household with a disability, poverty rates are higher even before allowing for the extra costs of the disability. After account is taken of the costs of disability, estimated poverty rates rise substantially where there is a disability present. Taking account of costs that vary with the severity of restrictions associated with a disability is also shown to make a large difference to comparisons derived from conventional poverty research. This study was significant because of the large and varied cohort number, as well as the combined methods used by Saunders to show how relative costs associated with having a disability affected the standard of living and its correlation to contemporary lines of measurable poverty. It paved the way for future policy development, especially concerning the NDIS. If we look to Table 3 of Saunders's research, we can see it provides details of the median incomes and poverty rates of different household types, separated into whether or not they contain an adult with a disability. The results are broken down by household types to make it easier to differentiate between the impact of disability and other factors such as age and household demographic that are known to vary systematically within household income. The poverty rates shown in the right-hand columns of Table 3 provide the first evidence that there is a strong association between the presence of disability and the incidence of poverty. Using the 50% of median income measure, the poverty risks facing working-age single people and couples without children are substantially higher if they have a disability. It is interesting to note that at the 60% of the median income poverty line, the differences by disability status disappear for most household types, the exceptions being working-age single people and working-age couples, with or without children, with the impact of disability more pronounced for those without children. Saunders's findings are still supported by the most recent 2006 poverty report conducted by the Australian Council of Social Services. Looking at Table 7, which has collated data for the fiscal year of 2013 to 2014, we can see that the gap between median income and the 50% poverty line measure is at $126. This further highlights that those with disabilities face entrenched poverty. According to a 2010 OECD research report, Australians with a severe disability and their families have substandard outcomes on every indicator of community participation and well-being. This is supported by a research report by Saunders and Wong in 2012. The report was conducted on behalf of the Social Research Policy Council. In it, the authors build on Saunders's previous 2007 research and aim to further define more indirect versions of poverty and equate them to Saunders's approaches to living standards model. Through their approach, we can see that there are many factors that also play an important role in protecting people from poverty. If poverty is ultimately a matter of inadequate resources, then it has to be acknowledged that resources must be defined more broadly to include, when discussing the nature of poverty and disability, such factors as access to family and social networks on which many people rely in times of financial stress and unmet mental, emotional and social needs. Access to adequate education, which in turn fosters skills vital for future employability. Appropriate care facilities. Many young people with acquired brain injuries are in nursing homes, for instance. And adequate and speedy access to services provided for by the NDIS. When we look to forms of poverty in terms of social exclusion and deprivation, it is easy to see cyclic patterns which foster systemic and entrenched poverty amongst those living with a disability, as these statistics on your screen show you.
So now we're going to talk about the causes of poverty. The connection between poverty and disability is quite complicated. Disability is both a cause and a consequence of poverty, and therefore, disability and poverty go hand in hand. It is a cause because it can lead to significant job loss, reduced earnings, barriers to education, skills development, significant additional expenses, and many other challenges that ultimately lead to economic hardship. It is also a consequence because poverty can limit access to healthcare and preventative services, and increase the likelihood that a person lives and works in an environment that may adversely affect their health. The result? Well, disability and poverty are intertwined. This notion reigns true in those with a mental disability. Not only does poverty occur as a result of a mental disability, but that poverty can also be the cause and onset of mental illness. Put simply, more social inequality leads to more mental illness. People with a disability are much more likely to experience material hardships such as food insecurity, inability to pay rent, mortgage and utilities, or be unable to get much-needed medical care. In addition to income poverty, individuals with disabilities are also nearly twice as likely to lack even modest precautionary savings in case of an unexpected expense or other financial shock. All of these factors significantly increase the risk of living in poverty. Specifically, mental disability has the capacity to prevent people fully participating in the community. People living with a mental illness suffer disconnection, alienation, exclusion, and discrimination, and many are also living in poverty. The Oxford Dictionary's definition of poverty as the state of being inferior in quality or insufficient in amount describes the way people suffering from mental illness and disability are living daily. Though they may not be street beggars, many are living in poverty as they do not have enough money to afford all the basic necessities. Barbara Hocking, the director of SANE Australia, gave some statistics on mental illness. She said the average cost of medication for people living with mental illness and disability is $100 per month, which for those living on the disability pension is a huge chunk of their budget. She also added that 46% of people with a mental disability are unable to afford treatment. 54% are unable to afford medication, and 96% are unable to afford the basic necessities in life, including secure housing and food, increasing the risk of poverty for this population. As we know, education is fundamental to development and growth, and many say it is the key to breaking the poverty cycle. Without education, individuals do not gain vital knowledge and skills. Lack of education significantly reduces employment opportunities, and in turn reduces the opportunity to earn an income. Many schools lack necessary learning support for children with disabilities, or their families simply cannot afford the level of support their child needs. Statistics from the Australian Human Rights Commission in 2009 highlight that Year 12 attainment was around 25% for people with disabilities, compared to just over 50% for people without disabilities. Even when a school has good structures and support systems in place, and families have the economic stability to afford education, a child with a mental disability may be unable to cope with the stresses of school life, making them a vulnerable group for poverty. Australians with a disability are more likely to be unemployed compared to those without a disability. Again, statistics from the Human Rights Commission in 2009 show that labour force participation for disability is a low 54% in comparison to 83% for people without disabilities. Secure employment is fundamental to generate a source of income. Whilst many work part-time jobs and would readily accept more hours, they aren't given the opportunity. In addition to much of the disabled population trying to find jobs, those who are in jobs are not free from discrimination and exclusion. The workplace is one of the main areas in which mental health issues are highly stigmatised, which leads to people being unable to cope with the pressures of the workplace and inevitably leads to unemployment. Many individuals with a mental disability may also lack the social skills needed to communicate or the mental capacity to perform everyday tasks, which act as barriers in many workplaces and can prevent these individuals from obtaining work. Lack of employment and job opportunities places this population group at the forefront of economic hardship, increasing their risk of poverty and reducing their quality of life. A simple and obvious observation is that the primary problem of the poor is that they have a low income, and the best way to alleviate this poverty would be to increase their income through productive employment. The higher than average risk of poverty for people with a disability is likely to be due, in part, to their weaker employment outcomes. A lack of income through employment significantly reduces an individual's ability to afford the necessities of life and can push them into poverty. It is this constant idea of that same endless cycle. Without an education, employment opportunities are significantly reduced. Without employment, there is no income. Without a steady income, individuals do not have the ability to afford safe and secure housing, food, clothes, and medical care when needed, pushing them into poverty. In 2013 and 2014, 15.8% of adults with a disability were living below the poverty line. Many people with a mental disability have difficulty finding employment and must therefore rely on income support payments, in particular the Disability Support Pension and the New Start Allowance, as their main income source. However, living on these income supports alone can place individuals below the poverty line. Since the introduction of welfare to work policies in 2006, an increasing number of people were assessed as having a partial work capacity. This is described as the capacity to work at least 15 hours per week or earn above the minimum wage over a 2-year period, are deemed ineligible for the disability support pension, and placed onto the lower New Start allowance. There is a decrease in people eligible for the disability support pension and an increase in New Start allowance recipients with a disability forced to live below the poverty line. According to the Department of Human Services in 2017, a person with a disability on the New Start allowance will receive the following payments weekly: New Start allowance of $267.80, rental assistance of $66.10, energy supplement of $4.40, coming to a total of $338.30. This demonstrates that the New Start allowance and additional supplements are still $88 below the poverty line for a single adult in Australia. In December 2013, the difference between these two payment types, disability support pension and the New Start allowance, was $158.70. When taking into account the additional costs associated with mental disability, including social support and care, medication and services, and transportation costs, a drop of this amount has a significant impact on quality of life, and it has the potential to push an individual with a mental disability into poverty. Evidently, it is easy to see the flow-on effect of lack of resources, deprivation, social exclusion, and discrimination on poverty. As we know, there are many different competing ideas about the causes and responsibilities surrounding poverty. According to Porter in 2017, there are two main ideologies that characterise contemporary Australian social policy and debates in regard to poverty. The first theory places emphasis on the notion that individual choices, actions, and responsibilities are responsible for causing poverty, while the second theory highlights broader social and economic structures supporting the idea that poverty is a result of socio-economic forces outside of an individual's control. Firstly, we will look at individual theories of poverty. These theories are influenced by the attention to the role of moral character and motivation in determining an individual's socio-economic status. Its foundation lies within the notion of survival of the fittest, the beliefs that societies benefits most when individuals are allowed to freely compete based on their natural talents and motivations. Essentially, those who experience poverty are believed to be lacking in some way. They either lack the natural talents to be financially successful, or they are not prepared to work hard enough to secure an adequate income. And therefore, the responsibility for poverty is placed solely on the individual. Ultimately, people who are in poverty because they are lazy, uneducated, ignorant, or otherwise inferior in some manner. Many believe that those with a mental disability are inferior to those without a disability, and therefore, this is why they are living in poverty. In this explanation of poverty, the lower unemployment rates amongst individuals with a mental disability could be attributed to them being too lazy to go out and get work. Now that we understand what the individual explanations of poverty entail, we can link it back to the causes of poverty for mental disability. So, people with a mental disability are considered to be biologically inferior. These individuals were either born with or obtained a mental disability, and therefore are responsible for their own poverty, as they are inferior to adults without a disability. This idea of survival of the fittest, where only the fittest can go out and be economically successful, whilst the weakest, in this case people with a disability, are left in poverty. It's the idea that there are plenty of jobs available, and the only reason that mentally disabled individuals are unemployed is either because they are too lazy to go out and get a job, or they lack the ambition and motivation to achieve success. This individualistic approach to explaining poverty ignores discrimination and other socio-economic factors that could act as barriers to success for this population group, and that's where the structural explanation of poverty comes into play. On the other hand, structural theories and explanations of poverty look at the broader inequalities within society. They believe that poverty is largely caused by the socio-economic system, and therefore beyond the control or influence of any individual. Porter, 2017, argues that poverty and wealth are structurally linked, even inseparable. From a structural explanation, people may say that poverty in individuals with a mental disability is caused by the following: the social exclusion and discrimination in employment, schools, and the wider community that may impede an individual with a mental disability to participate in their environment, lack of school support or adequate access to healthcare services and medication at affordable prices. If they do have the ability to work, many of this population are working in low-paying jobs where they work more hours but receive less income than wealthy people, leading to economic hardship as they face large additional costs due to their disability. Income support's not meeting basic needs, as we looked at with the New Start allowance and disability support pension forcing them to live below the poverty line. And finally, an increasing lack of affordable housing and healthcare options available. All of these factors combine together to act as barriers for this population group. Overall, individuals with a mental disability are at higher risk of poverty than those without, whether it is because of individual factors or structural and economic reasons like holes in the economic system that deliver them inadequate income. There is no denying that they are a vulnerable population group when it comes to poverty risk factors.
When considering the relationship between poverty and mental disability, it becomes clear that there is a two-way causal link, as has been discussed already. People who become impoverished or drop below the poverty line have an increased chance of becoming mentally ill or of experiencing an enhancement of pre-existing mental conditions, as is the case in the following video.
Coralie is a mum who came to us probably 12 weeks ago. Again, has been put on from a parenting payment to New Start, and her youngest son is 8, so she has a requirement to be working, and she wants to work. She wants to be part of society. But Coralie comes after losing her husband 8 years ago with a lot of anxiety, a lot of health issues.
With her son turning 8, Coralie was forced off a single parenting payment and onto New Start this year. Her income dropped by $60 a week. It also upended her already frail financial situation.
The next week I was getting letters from the Housing Commission saying I hadn't paid my rent. So I was getting, from all the direct debits I get taken out of my pension, I hadn't paid them. So everyone's demanding their money. I had 2 direct debits coming out from a loan company. So they put me in debt for my bank $80 that week. So for the next 2 months, I was really still haven't caught up from January, because every week, every time I got money in that bank, the bank would swallow it because they're taking back the fees that I didn't have the money there to replace in the first. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
So the banks charged me for not having money there that's in LinkedIn put in. Other times
so you just got caught in this whole cycle. But did you end up with less money on New Start or not?
Yeah.
On top of everything else, Coralie's days are crippled by anxiety.
Very bad. Like this morning, it took me about an hour to stop vomiting and dry reaching. And my mates said one late. Someone will turn, like this morning I was that sick, then tradesmen turn up. So that puts me back again. So then my son's late for school, I'm late here for school, and it just puts everyone back.
Just as Coralie's case clearly demonstrates the effect of poverty on a person's mental state, the 2016 ACOS report clearly demonstrates the increased likelihood of poverty for those who are disabled. The 2016 report presents 2 levels of disability, the more severe being disability with core activity limitation. This term is defined as a person who has a disability or long-term health condition and also has a profound, severe, or moderate limitation with core activities, which are defined as communication, mobility, or self-care. In other words, someone who is in a physical or mental state that renders them unable to function optimally within the areas of communication, mobility, and self-care. An example of someone who falls within this category is found in a 2011 ACOS document titled Mental Health and Poverty, A Poisonous Relationship. Kylie is a 28-year-old mother of 2 who also suffers from schizophrenia. Due to her mental condition, Kylie is unable to work, and as a result, she receives welfare payments. As we know, these payments are such that she and her children live below the poverty line. From this example, it's clear to see that because of Kylie's mental state, she has become impoverished. All the way up until the last 20 or so years, studies have gone a long way, clearly demonstrating the impact of mental health on an individual's ability to function in society. Yet little focus has been placed on asking the reverse question. Does poverty impact on pre-existing mental health or even cause problems that were previously non-existent? Looking at the situation that Coralie finds herself in, it is abundantly clear that her situation of poverty has had and is having a large impact on her mental state. Anxiety is clearly stemming from her inability to pay bills and to keep her bank accounts in surplus. Despite an eagerness to work, as Helen Long, the interviewer in the video, suggests, Coralie is stuck in a situation that is taxing heavily and continually on her mental health. The 2011 ACOS document mentioned previously shares a quote from Kylie relating to her perspective on the situation she lives in. She's quoted as saying, "I don't think society understands the insidious cycle created by having mental illness and living on the lowest of incomes. Every day is spent working out what bill must be paid and which can wait. It is mentally draining and all-consuming, exacerbating my symptoms. For me, low income means being acutely aware of what is in other people's shopping trolleys. I'm in awe of the message trolleys stacked with neat brand products, luxury items to us." Considering this quote, it's hard to ignore that the accountability lies firmly with the system. Kylie was unable to work due to her disability, and the very government support designed specifically for people like her failed to hold her above the poverty line. This is a clear example of structural inequality. Taking both of these examples and considering them together, an alarming conclusion can be drawn. Created by this two-way causal link is a cycle of poverty and mental illness that becomes hard to break, even for those who want to get out of the cycle and rise above the poverty line. From the available evidence, Coralie is stuck below the poverty line, not due to an unwillingness to participate in society, but due to the insufficient amount she receives on New Start. She can't seem to make a move and change her situation because she's always on the back foot paying bills. The 2011 ACOS report states that 96% of the mentally ill on welfare payments are unable to afford basic necessities, including the very medication that treats their illnesses. Once again, and without a doubt, the accountability lies with the system. When the mentally ill on welfare can't even afford medication to increase their ability to function in society, the only reasonable conclusion is that the system has failed them, perhaps even caused them to be stuck in this cycle of poverty and mental illness. Following the previous statements regarding the lack of resources provided to individuals with mental illnesses, I will be elaborating more on the social security benefit of the disability support pension. The disability support pension has been present nationwide in Australia since 1991 and is a crux of income for roughly 60% of all people experiencing poverty. Since then, forms of government have tried to adapt, change, and even remove the disability support pension. Since the Howard Liberal government of 2006, serious alterations to the disability support pension have been made, including a reduction in working hours to be eligible for payment from 30 hours to 15. Individuals who were instead either placed on the lower New Start allowance or are subtracted money from their income in relation to their hours worked and hourly rates. Recently, the government has introduced continuous inability to work checks to assess whether individuals are able to meet the 15-hour-a-week threshold, judging whether they are worthy to access the disability support pension. The limitations to the characteristics mentioned previously about the disability support pension are plentiful. Firstly, by reducing the number of hours a week for eligibility of the pension, individuals with mental disabilities are forced to relinquish entitled and earned money due to their increased participation in the workforce, diminishing the value of work for a group struggling to find stable employment and income. Additionally, individuals who surpass this pension threshold and enter the lower New Start allowance are disadvantaged by roughly $158 a week, further diminishing the value of work. Lastly, a major disadvantage of the continuous inability to work checks is the ineffectiveness of a one-size-fits-all approach. In relation to people with mental health issues, two individuals with the same mental illness diagnosis and same form of disability pension could still be completely different. Both individuals could experience the mental illness differently in terms of severity, with age playing a determining factor alongside skills and experience of